Okay, so we're going to get started. Today we're going to work on a personal logo. And so I'm going to walk through a lecture about logos in general, and then you will work on a logo in the world of Illustrator. I'll show you some various techniques. We're going to use a toolbox called the Pathfinder tool. It allows you to combine shapes together, cut shapes out, and that sort of thing. So it's useful kind of moving forward. We're going from here into some color theory. So we'll talk about colors a little bit later this week. And then before too long, we'll be in AutoCAD. And then we'll come back to Illustrator again. So things move rather quickly. But now that you're so familiar with the pen tool, what better use than to create a personal logo for yourself? So we're going to talk through logos in general. I'll show you a bunch of examples. I'm going to end with a whole bunch of current design trends in logos so you can kind of get inspired. But essentially, an effective logo is very distinctive. It's something that we recognize. It's about brand recognition. We're constantly inundated with logos, and we become very familiar, and we have an association with that particular logo. And so it's important to kind of see that. A lot of the images that I'll show you are images that you're not that familiar with because they're different, and it allows us to analyze, but then I'll throw in a bunch that we do recognize. It should be appropriate for whatever it is that you're trying to brand. Obviously, if it was inappropriate, that wouldn't work. It should be practical. It should be graphic. Generally, simpler is better. Simple in form makes it easy. And we'll go through some of the simplest ones are oftentimes the best one. And it should convey whatever the intended message is. So if we look at some of the most common logos that are out there, right? Shell, for example, upper left corner, has absolutely nothing to do with gas. Nothing. Yet we all associate that logo with a gas station. Kind of interesting, right? So why it's Shell? Who knows, right? Maybe it has something to do, somebody way back when was thinking about, it's oil and, the old dinosaurs were compressed and shells and fossils and I don't know, right? But somehow it got translated to that's a gas symbol, right? Volkswagen, the VW, it's kind of an iconic symbol, right? It's been around a long time. NBC with the peacock, again, very iconic long-term symbol. Rolling Stones, for example, right? Again, kind of an iconic symbol. Okay? Simplicity, easy recognition of a logo, right? You see a logo over and over again. Do you associate it? The bow tie logo, do you associate that with Chevy or not? Right? That's a big important factor of logos is can you associate, especially when it's a non-text-based logo. So something like the Chevy logo, right? There doesn't have to be any Chevy around it, Chevrolet around it at all. We just associate that with, oh, that's a Chevy logo, right? And so if you can get that brand recognition, you don't have to have text around it, which can be useful, right? Is it memorable? Is it versatile? Can it be big? Can it be small? Right? Can it go in small places? Can it go in, on a billboard? Those things are all important. And does it have some kind of a feature that's unexpected or unique? Okay, how about this one? Anybody have this morning? Right? Really, if you stop and think about it, okay, at first glance, boom, it's a Starbucks logo. We know that. We see it all the time. But really, if you look at it, it's kind of weird. Right? This doesn't qualify under the simple other than it's a green and white lady. But if you really start to look at it, it's kind of bizarre. Does this have anything to do with coffee? No. Right? But it's iconic. It's very, very classic. It's something that we see over and over again. And because we see it over and over again, we associate this strange lady with a star on her head with coffee. Right? It's very effective. Okay? I don't know. I like this one. The halfway between a hill and a crocodile. Right? But it's kind of fun. This one's another good one. Sorry, some of these are a little blurry, right? But the fish bomb, right? Anyway. Can it be enduring, right? You don't want to follow some kind of trendy thing that's going to go out of fashion, right? How can your logo be future-proof, right? 10, 20, 50 years from now, can that still be your logo? Or is it, oh man, that is so old-fashioned, right? So, for example, what if on the back of your phone, this was on the back of your phone? This was the original Apple computer logo, right? In 1970, whatever. Okay? Would this have been as effective of a branding technique on the back of your phone as the current Apple logo? Not at all, right? So sometimes you have to think about what is future-proof. And is something like this future-proof? No, right? It's not going to live out. So let's take a look at the Apple logos. Okay, so here we go. There's the first one, the original Apple logo, way back in the 70s right here, right? Didn't last very well. We moved from 1976 to 1998. It's a pretty good stretch, right? We had this Apple logo, which was the rainbow Apple logo, but it's essentially the same Apple, right? You see the Apple over and over again, other than in this era it had the rainbow. Some of us in this room are old enough to remember these, right? Not all of us, however. Okay? Then we move forward. Steve Jobs comes back to Apple. Major rebranding of what Apple is. Change the company, etc. 1998, and we go to the very, very iconic black, white, nothing else. Okay? Big shift to go from the rainbow into the black and white. Then we move forward. Right? Trends change it a little bit. 2001 to 2007, we were kind of fascinated with this glossy, trendy thing going on, right? So the Apple logo becomes glossy and shiny. Okay, that's fine. It's the same logo, though. It has a little bit of drop shadow to it. We move forward, 2007, right? And they've actually updated it since. They've gone back, and I'll show you the next one. Right, 2007, we got the Apple. We stripped off a bunch of the shine to it, but at the same time, it's still a little 3D, a little bit of shadow, a little embossed, right? Then we move forward into the current Apple logo, right? White on gray, black on white. It's, again, very flat, very stark, no shadows or any of that sort of thing. But it's been the same logo, the same shapes since 1976. That's an enduring logo, right? I'm really glad that they didn't pick the first logo, right? That wouldn't fit. So let's talk about the logo design process. Okay? If we were going to break this down into a process, we'd start with the design brief. Okay? What are you drawing? Who are you working for? What do they want? Okay? Then we do research to find out what else is in the field. Then we move into the research reference, kind of in the same vein. Reference would again be looking at what other competitors are out there. So if you were designing the Apple logo, right? Well, what does Microsoft's logo look like? Right? What does Dell's logo look like? What does HP's logo look like? You want to understand what the marketplace is. Sketching and then conceptualizing, it takes a lot of that to come up with something good. Okay? Reflection, go back and look at what you've done. Is it good? Is it not good? And then you finally present it to the client. Okay? I like that one. So here it is in its kind of Venn diagram format here in terms of how much time is spent in which stage. The big one, sketching and conceptualizing right there in the center, no surprise. That's going to take the most of your time. Okay? Move forward. So let's look at each of these steps in a little bit more detail. So let's start with the design brief. Okay? You want to question the client, and in the case of today, you are the client. You're designing your own logo. So ask yourself, right? What is the intended purpose? What do I want to do with this? Where is it going to go? Is it going to go on a T-shirt? Is it going to go on letterhead? Is it going to go on a phone case? I don't know. Right? Think about where this logo might go, and that might help you decide what it looks like. Okay? So where it is to be used, we just talked about that. And this is also a good time to talk to whoever you're designing for about how much it's going to cost, how much you want to charge them. Okay? In the case of you today, guess what? It's free. Right? Or you can pay yourself a bunch of money. I don't know. It's up to you. Okay? But if you're doing it for somebody else, you obviously want to talk to them about that. Then you go into research. Okay? What industry does this logo belong in? Right? So in your case, it has something to do with maybe you're an architectural designer, you're interested in design, you're a student, maybe it goes on your personal landing page. I don't know. Right? So what other logos are used in this industry? Right? Maybe look up the logos of architecture firms. What do they look like? Right? What do school logos look like? Right? Those kinds of things can help inform you of what's appropriate. Okay? What's the history of other logos? Okay? Even you probably have a history of logos. Maybe you had to do one in 130. You drew something. Okay? You might look back on it and say, oh my God, why did I do that? But the point is you have a history. You have some logos. You want to understand what that history is and deliberately change or work off of that. Right? Depends. If you're working for a company that has a history of logo, maybe you keep with that logo and you do a variant of that logo. Maybe you evolve it a bit more. What are your competitors using? Okay? Maybe it's a little bit unfair to call all of you in the class competitors to one another, but technically you kind of are. You're in the same field, right? And you are kind of a competitor to each other. What is everybody else doing? What are the logos? Right? When you were in 130, did somebody have a great logo? Maybe you can learn from that. A good, successful logo, right, is a good place to start. You can't copy it directly because logos are so brand associated, right? You can't just take Coca-Cola's logo and make yours out of it. Right? It doesn't work. Okay? But you can learn a lot from other people's logos. And so if you learn from them, you look at them, you can be inspired by them, and you can think about what makes them successful. Okay? You want to think about current design trends as well. So right now we're in a very flat UI, user experience. All right? And if we look at our computers, if we look at the new Windows 10 that we're all stuck with, if you look at OS 10, whatever it is, you look at your iPhone, right? There's a big movement to strip away shadows and embossed and shiny and those kinds of things, right? If we went back in time, actually the iPhone is probably one of the best examples of how this trend has changed. Johnny Ive is the lead designer at Apple, responsible for this kind of major shift. And when you look at kind of how it progressed, the old iPhones, the early iPhones, everything was always shiny, right? There was always shadows and whatever, and that was the trend, right? And everything reflected that. Then Johnny Ive said, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to shift the trend. We're going to move to flat UI, no shadows, right? Simpler logos and that sort of thing. Now everybody's followed suit, right? Microsoft did it, Dell did it, HP did it. Everybody's followed suit, and now that's all we see, right? eBay does it. Well, eBay's kind of always been relatively flat.
Yeah, but it's more simplistic.
Yeah, exactly. Google, right? We all went that direction. So things change, and you want to be aware of that. Okay? So right now, the style is very flat, no shadows. So maybe it's appropriate for you to do something flat with no shadows, right? Maybe you want to buck the trend and make it shiny with shadows. I don't know, but think about why you want to do it. Then we get into sketching and conceptualizing. And again, this is probably the most important part of this. This is the nuts and bolts of it. You have to develop your logo design concepts. And the first logo design that you do is never going to be the final one. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, I guess it's theoretically possible that you could nail it on the first try, but probably not. Right? It's going to take some evolution. You want to fall back on your research and reference steps. You want to keep evolving ideas, keep trying new things, see what happens. Right? And I'm going to ask you to do that today. You want to produce lots and lots of ideas, right? And then you're going to distill them down into an idea. So I'm going to show you an example of coming up with a logo. And this is not mine. It's just an example. Okay? So they took this photograph and they abstracted it into a drawing, a hand sketch. Okay? Simplified it a little bit, got rid of some of the details. Okay? Then they took it and kind of made it a little bit more geometric. Okay, less free flow, a little bit more geometric. Started to identify what are the common shapes that I'm seeing in this particular logo. Right? Abstracted those into just shapes with a little bit of shadow on them, so you could see this evolution. Right? Then they said, okay, well, let me take and make these shapes in Illustrator. So they rounded the rectangles with a little bit of a radius. Right? And they put those shapes together. So you see how it translated from the photograph all the way through. Right? And they said, this isn't quite right. Let me shift it so that it's on its side, just a little bit. Okay. We need to add a little bit of a border around this lower one so that it stands out and shows that it's in front. Right? And we end up with a relatively final design here. Okay. So it goes all the way through this evolution to become this design. Right? Maybe we add a little bit more. Maybe we add some text. Right? What's the appropriate text? We'll talk about text in just a second. Right? Different versions. right? Maybe we have the grayscale with the red logo. We have the all gray. We have the black, right? What do those versions do for us? It might be worth it. And how would that be applied to, say, stationery, business card, those kinds of documents, okay, website, etc. Okay. Another example here, right? These are the initial sketch pages for coming up with the logo, right? And so here's some early trials of what's kind of working. But let's go through some of the process here. Okay? So we take and we draw some curves, pen tool, Illustrator, right? And then they made this a little bit 3D, so this wouldn't fit in the flat design era, right? Add a little bit of gradient to it, and we've gone through the whole spectrum of gradient here with a little bit of shadow. Right? Then it comes time to pick the font to go with it. Right? These are all very, very similar. Which one's the right one? You've got to try them all to figure out which one looks right. Some are a little bit thicker, some are a little thinner. What feels right as part of this particular logo? Make it a live object. We'll talk about doing that a little bit later. And then we end up with the final version of the logo. So it takes a lot of iteration to get to where this fits. Again, what's it look like in color? Right? Color on black. And then how about a grayscale? Okay, if we made this just grayscale, it would be hard to see the difference of the three-dimensionality to it. So they adapted this lower section here to have those little bit of white lines, right, to show the three-dimensionality of this particular logo. Then we get into the reflection phase. Right? This is where we look at all the stuff we created and decide, is it working, is it not working, what looks good, what doesn't look good. Okay? You have to divorce yourself from the attachment. We talked about this before, in that we become very attached to the things that we create. And if we're so attached to them, we can't necessarily see what's good or what's bad about them. Okay? So one of the best things to do, and it's actually a step on your handout today, when you read 115, I say you have to turn to your neighbor and ask them what they think. Okay? And they have to tell you what they think. Okay? Hopefully, it's constructive. Right? I'd prefer not to be, oh, that's terrible, right? And then nothing further. Okay? You're allowed to say that's terrible, but at least explain why it's terrible. Right? Your color choice is bad. Your graphics aren't clear. Whatever it is. Right? But try to be constructive about it. Okay? If you were out in the actual field, design field, you might have another person that's in your office. You ask them. Right? Maybe you have a good friend that's also in the design field. You go and show them. Right? It's kind of like in portfolios. You get different opinions. That's part of the design process. Okay? You receive the feedback. You work on your ideas some more. You let those ideas mature. You keep tweaking. And finally, you arrive at that final version. Okay? This is a very, very important step. I love this one. Grab it. Half grab, half rabbit. And the logo somehow reflects that. Right? It's one of those you can see it both ways. So you can have the two hands or you can have the rabbit. It's up to you. Right? But it's very creative. It's nicely worked together. It's flat. There's no shadows. But it's really well done. Okay? This is a Japanese beer. Right? I can't read what it says, but the logo is very iconic. Right? The business cards that go with the logo. So you think about how they all put together. Then we get into the presentation phase. Okay, this is where you've distilled down your ideas. You have a final version. You show that final version to your client. In the case of today, you just get to show it to yourself. Right? But if you were designing for somebody, you would show it to them, and you'd let them know, this is what I think your logo should look like, and these are the variants of it. This is the black and white version. This is the grayscale, etc. Right? If the client doesn't like it, guess what? Go back and start again. That happens. Right? Same thing happens in architectural design. You show them their house, and suddenly they say, no, I really wanted a bigger kitchen, and you go back to the drawing board and you fix that. Okay? It's the nature. Okay, so let's look at the Mall of America example here. Right? So we have our generic Mall of America logo here. Right? But then we have all the variants that are in the same theme. Okay? So up there in the upper left is the classic Mall of America logo right there. Right? But then we can unwrap the Mall of America and have little smaller pieces. Right? Likewise, depending on what's appropriate, right? How big you need it to be, right? You've got variants, same theme, but a little bit of variance. Okay. Also, you could take the same logo here and you can adapt it for various holidays, right? So you can have the holiday version in green and red. You can have the Valentine's Day version in pink, right? It's the same logo, but you have that evolution of it, right? You can tweak it, you can change it. That's a good, successful logo, right? There's a lot of variety that comes in this. The bottom down here is used as patterns that go behind other advertisements or whatever. So it's a really adaptable, good logo for something like a mall where you're using lots of different logos different times a year, and you want to be able to add that variety. Okay? So you want to learn from others. Okay? I would argue this is one of the most successful brands of all time. Okay? All that is a little swoosh. And we all know what that stands for. Right? There's no lettering. There's nothing fancy about it. Right? It's about as simple as it could possibly get. All of you could draw this right now in Illustrator. With your skills in Illustrator, you could draw this. Okay? I see some questioning faces. Yes, I think you could. The point is, it is very, very successful. They've done a great job of staying consistent. Right? You see it in a lot of places. And that brand recognition and that simplicity really makes us understand this is Nike. This is a consistent brand. We understand what that means. Okay? And so I would argue that this is one of the more successful ones. Okay? Some logos are based on fonts, or based on type, or based on letters, words, etc. When you use a font, right, or use initials or letters or whatever, you have to be very careful about what that font is and how is it used, where else is it used, right? What makes it unique to you? Which one is the right one, right? What is the font going to go out of style? Is it the papyrus font that goes out, right? Does it reflect your client or your business, right? You may have to make your own font or design your own letters to make them really appropriate for you. It might not be one of the listed fonts that comes with Windows 10. Right? You may have to go out and do a little more research. Okay? Load custom fonts if it's necessary. And the little details really, really, really matter in a logo. Because again, you're going to see this over and over again. So you want to make sure that the kerning and the tracking and all of those things that we talked about in the typography lesson match up and are really well done. Okay? How about some logos based on text? Right? Again, very iconic logos. We'd recognize them. Coca-Cola, good example of it. Okay? Very iconic, but it is definitely text-based, not shape-based. Okay? And so it's a different way of doing it. And this might work, bless you, this might work for you. It might not work for you. But you want to think about, does it work or does it not work? Okay? Disney is a great example of a very iconic font-based, right, logo. Okay? I actually think it's pretty hard to read. It looks like it ends in a P to me. Right? I know it doesn't, but that it's not that clear. Okay? But they use it over and over again, and it's recognizable. Even though I can't read it, I understand that it's Disney. Okay? CNN, another example, very iconic, etc. NASA is also a very, very iconic font-based design. Okay, so FedEx. Okay, ready for mind blown? Okay, there's a hidden piece of the FedEx logo. Right? Some of you already know this. Right? There's an arrow. Right? You'll never look at the FedEx logo the same way again. Maybe not. I don't know. Right? But the point is, very, very cool, very well done. Okay? You take something that is text-based entirely, you put that arrow in there, and it's just the negative space, and it has a lot to do with FedEx moving things, right? Which is what they do. So the designers of this did a brilliant job. Right? This is one of the best ones out there because of that little hidden bit that's in it. Okay? You have a company called Dynamic Dust. How do you design a logo for that? Right? That's one of the challenges as well. Right? I really like this one. This is a font designer. But it's very clear, very well done, and you could see this on like a business card. You could see it on the side of a building. Right? It works. It's a very scalable, nicely clean design. So absolutely no clip art, right? Guess what? If it's clip art, everybody else has it. So it's not a good logo, okay? The other thing is Don't do any of the generic cliche things. No light bulbs for ideas, no globes for international, right? All of that's been done. None of it looks good. Okay, stay away from that. Don't copy another logo, right? If you copied Coca-Cola's logo and you just changed the words to say something else, actually, if you're in Rome, they have a Roma shirt that has the Coca-Cola logo on it. Go figure, I don't know. It's touristy. Everybody likes it. Anyway, the point is, if you copy another logo, everybody knows you copied it, right? If you have a Coca-Cola shirt that says Roma on it, or Rome or whatever, guess what? Everybody knows you copied the Coca-Cola logo. Like, think about it. So you can't copy somebody else's logo, but it doesn't mean you can't look and be inspired by other people's logos. But it does have to be unique to you. Okay? Output files. We're looking for a PNG at 1500 pixels by 1500 pixels at 300 dpi for print. Okay? This is larger than you will need, but at the same time, it's a pretty good size. Remember, we talked about vector graphics are scalable. So we can scale down if we need to, but we can also scale up. You want to do a billboard with your logo on it, you can do it. That's why we're designing it as a vector graphic. Web might be 800 by 800 at 72. Right? The little icon that shows up in the corner of your browser when you're browsing to like a website or whatever, that's a little 16 by 16 or 32 by 32 pixel. Your logo might be able to be shrunk down to that size. Right? Always save your AI file because you want to be able to go back and edit it and change it if you want to tweak it, etc. Black and white, grayscale, color. What's appropriate? Which one are you going to use? Right? You want to think through that. So I have a variety of examples that I'll show you just to kind of think through what's working. The cloud with the paperclip, I thought that was pretty good.
I never noticed that.
Yeah. I don't know. I liked it. I know it's blurry, but the Dyna table, sure, why not? Right? I don't like that one. The Fox Steady, that one's pretty good. Right? Very classic, iconic examples. I like this one too. Leap Startup. That's pretty good. Another example of early sketches, right? Preliminary kind of modeling. We're thinking eBay or Google at this point, right? Right? This is the font and everything. It's not quite right. Okay? So they move forward. Right? This feels a little bit more contemporary, right? A little bit more current. Right? What if they replace one of the letters with a jigsaw puzzle? So you kind of see how this evolution happens. Right? And then what it might look like as a business card setup. Okay, so let's look at the design trends for 2016. Right? And so I have a variety. These are hopefully to get you inspired. And so I'll talk through what these mean and kind of what they're showing us. Right? In here, instead of doing full gradients, right, doing color changes over time. So subtle differences in color to mimic the gradient, but it's not actually a gradient. Okay? Circles, really in. Okay? Open table, right, etc. Those are all current design trends using the circles. Right? Half and half, right? The little bit of subtle shadow on one half versus the other, slight different color on one half versus the other, right? All of these logos use that same strategy. Right? The linked chains, things that are linked together. Okay? Obviously, variety in their links, but they're very much linked chains. Okay? These are shapes that are infinite loops. So as you trace through them, they'll keep going in a circle. Okay? So you can do that. That's kind of trendy right now. Clipping the corners or dog-earing the corners. Right? Again, kind of trendy, kind of in. Corners in general are kind of in. Right? So you can either clip the corner or you can emphasize the corner. It's up to you, but they're both in. Right? Dotted lines or dashed lines. The off shift. Right? I got worried there that I spelled shift wrong, but I didn't. It's okay. When I first glanced at it, I was like, oh. Anyway, SF MoMA, good example of this. Right? To me, a lot of these are really hard to read. right? But for whatever reason, it's kind of like this lower one, the IT formations. I don't know. It's a little odd, but it's trendy. Okay, the little curls, something that folds back on itself. A little bit of gradients as part of it. The pocket shield, right? So the little shield coat of arms look, kind of trendy. Right, 3D slices. Letter blocks, so it's a block with a letter in it. Right? I think this has been kind of popular forever. I mean, Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator logos are essentially this. Okay, so classic. Right? Little benders. To me, these are the same as curls, but you get the idea. Okay? The last one is bars. So making up your logo just with a series of bars. Okay? So those are the current design trends for right now. Hopefully that helps get you inspired a bit. I'm going to show you some examples in Illustrator of how to go about doing this. So give me a second to switch over, and then you guys can start on your logos. Okay, so we're going to do this without internet. Apparently my computer has decided that the internet is not a valid resource. Anyway, so we're gonna work through and kind of create our logo from scratch. The thing that I want to emphasize is a tool palette called the Pathfinder Tools that are within Illustrator. So I'm going to walk you through those and how you can kind of combine and put shapes together. I'll use some of the design trends as I go through creating my logo, and we'll see which one kind of looks best. Again, iteration is always important. So I've gone ahead and I've opened Adobe Illustrator, and I'm going to go to File and then New. And when I create a new document, the profile is going to be for print. Okay? And as I come down here, I'm going to take a width and a height of 1500 px by 1500 px. Okay, so it's a square in its size. And I'll go ahead and say OK. Right? And it gives me a square to start working in. Okay? Now, one of the things that's useful is I'm going to work with my layers so that I have, as I go through and iterate and make different versions of my logo, I'll just do it on a different layer. And by doing that, I can turn on certain layers, turn off certain layers as I evolve and decide which one looks right. Okay, so let me go ahead and create a new layer. I've got a layer here. We can start with that. I'll rename it for Logo 1 for right now. It's highlighted in light blue, which means it's my active layer. Right? And so I can go ahead and start drawing on the page. Okay? So I'm going to start with a rectangle. And so let's make a box. I'm going to hold down Shift so that it's square. Right? And so let's make a box. And instead of filling it with white, let's fill it with some color. I don't know. I like orange. Let's fill it with orange. Okay? You guys should be able to see orange OK on the screen. Okay? I don't want there to be a stroke or an outline around this shape. So I'll click on the outline and make that go away. So I have no outline, just a fill color. And then let me go ahead and I want to draw a triangle down here-ish. And we'll close it. Okay? So I'm working with that shield concept. Okay? Yeah? 1500 by 1500. Okay? So I'm going to work with this shield a little bit. I can push these two together so that they are next to each other, but these are still two distinctly separate objects. Okay? I'd like these two objects to become one object. Okay? And I can do that using a set of tools called the Pathfinder Tools. And if I go up to Window and I choose Pathfinder, right? What the Pathfinder tools do is they allow us to combine shapes or to cut shapes out or break apart shapes based on separate objects. So in this case, I have this shape. I'll hold down Shift and select that shape. These two objects, I want to join them together to make them one shape. So I'll use the Unite Pathfinder. And when I do that, instead of having individual shapes, I have just one shape. Okay? And if I went to my direct select and I selected any one of these points, right, you can see that it's now one continuous line that goes around. Okay, so it's a really handy way of starting to combine shapes together. Okay, so let's say that I was relatively happy with this shape to start, but I wanted it split into two halves. Okay, I could draw a box across one half, so we'll say something like that, and for simplicity's sake, let me change the color on this to be something darker. Okay, and I could say, okay, let's use the Pathfinder tools again. I have this object and I have this object. Okay, and let's look over here, and how about this, which says divide? Okay, it divides everything into separate shapes. So if I click on that, right, these are all now separate shapes. They happen to be connected together, but if I use the direct select tool, I can get rid of this shape, and now I have this, or I have this as two separate pieces, which will allow me to take one of them and maybe color it to be a slightly different color. Let's go back. Let me make it. Eyedropper there. Let's make it match that, and then let's just darken this a bit, maybe like that. Okay, so I'm doing that two-half approach, okay, with the subtle difference in color. But I've worked with the Pathfinder tools to help create the geometry of my shape. Okay, so let's say that I want to add a letter. Let me use the Type tool, and I'm going to put a G. Obviously, it's really small, so we need to make it a little bit bigger. Let's try 100. Oops. So right now it has a fill and a stroke. We need the outline to go away. And hold on a second. It's so small that it is not. Here we go. Go up there a little bit bigger. 150, about 300. We'll get there. Okay. And maybe I don't like this font. Maybe I want to load a different font. Right, whatever it is. I'm not sure what the right font is. I can move this over as part of my drawing. And you know what? I'm just going to use the transform tool, and I'm going to just scale this up to be bigger. And I'm holding down Shift so that it's consistent here. Right? Once I have that established, okay, it's still a live text object. Okay? But I want to be able to cut out the G from these two pieces so that it's transparent in the background. If I want to do that, I can convert this text into an actual object. And it's up under the Type menu. And with it selected, I can go to Type, Create Outlines. And when I create the outlines, it changes from being a font to being a live object. Okay, so I could go in with my pen tool, and I could edit any one of these anchor points, and it's no longer a font. Okay, but now that I have this established, right, I could select these once again, and I could come over here, and I could subtract the object that's in the front from the object that's in the back. Whoops. Let me do it. I'm going to go ahead and divide instead, because it'll keep this, and then I can get rid of this, this, and that. And so I've cut out, and so now I have a shape here. Right? These are all individual little shapes. See, like that? So I could take this, and we could nudge it over a little bit if we wanted a little bit of an outline down the center. So you see how I'm evolving this over the course of things? Okay? So let's start again and do a different object. So there's one example. Let's do another one. Okay? This time we'll turn this one off. We'll start with a square again. We hold down Shift. There's the square. Okay. This time, maybe I want to, I don't know, I don't have good ideas. Let's do some bars here. And let me make this a different color just so we can see it. Sometimes it's easier to just make things random colors and then you can fine tune them later. Okay, so let's take this and I'm going to copy and paste a bunch of these. Okay, so right now these aren't exactly positioned particularly well, so I'm going to use the Align tools. So let me go ahead and select all of those objects except for my square in the background. And I'm going to come over to the Align tool. Notice it's in the same window here. I'm going to align them all to the top. Okay, then I'm going to distribute objects along the center so that the spacing is even among all of them. Okay, so I use those two buttons to work that. I'm going to group these objects together. Let me right-click and group them so that they're all one. And then we'll move them. I'm going to move them off for just a second, and I want them to end up right at the center of this box. Okay? So now I have these objects on top of this object. Let's go ahead and select both sets. And we'll go back to the Pathfinder tool. Right? And let's see if we can subtract this time. There we go. So we cut out. So this is now transparent underneath. I should show you that it's transparent. Let me make send it back. So you can see it's transparent. Okay, and so I've cut those out. Let's add a little bit of text again. And let's make this smaller. Okay, I'm going to make this live objects. So let me go ahead and go to Type, Create Outlines. There it is. I'm going to do the same thing with my last name down here. And let me go to Object. Oops. There we go. Type, Create Outlines. There it is. So I have both of these working together. Right, like that. Maybe I'll cut those out as well. So let's take this first, and we'll subtract. That's cut out. Let's take this one, and we'll subtract. Oops. No, apparently it doesn't want to do that. In this case, I might have to just divide. And let me get in here. Now we can get rid of these. Let me go to Select, Same Fill Color. There you go. That'll just let me delete those faster. Okay, and so there's maybe an example. I don't know. The point is that I'm working through some different ideas to come up with what's the appropriate one. Now maybe this one needs two different color options. So maybe I'll divide this one into two halves. I'm going to use the pen tool, and I'm going to go through the corners. Oops. Like that. And then let me take these objects again, and let me divide them. And get rid of this. Get rid of these. Okay. So you see how I'm able to use the Pathfinder tool to create these kinds of shapes. Now, do I really know what this means? No. Right? I'm making stuff up on the fly just so that you guys can see this working process. You will spend a little bit more time really thinking about what represents you and what brand would look right for you, etc. Okay? The key today is using the Pathfinder tool. Right? When I'm all done, I may need to resize my object to make it bigger. Right now it's smaller than my actual artboard. Let's make this a little bit bigger. I'll use the transform tool. And we'll make that a little bit bigger. Likewise, I could come back to my first design, this one, and I could make this one a little bit bigger, move it up into that corner. I'll use the transform again. Like that. We'll move it over. Okay. And when I'm done, right, I'll go up to File, Save for Web, right, and I'm going to create just a PNG version. Now, notice that when I choose PNG, the background stays transparent. Right? That can be very, very useful because you can put it on any color paper, anything. If it's white, it can be a little bit more problematic. Right? So I would encourage you to make sure that things are transparent like this so that it's more versatile later on. So I'll save it as a PNG 24 in the 1500 by 1500. When I click Save, it'll save. That's what I'm going to post for today. Remember, there is a step where you have to turn and ask your neighbor what's appropriate. Do you like it? Do you not like it? How can I make it better? Okay? This should take the bulk of today for you to work on. Right? If you do one logo and you walk away, you won't have learned the process. Right? So it's important to stay here. It's important to be kind of working through what the various options are and really find something that looks good to you. Okay? I do have an optional step here about choosing color palettes. It's a little bit premature because we haven't talked through color palettes just yet. That'll be next class. But it is there if you want to go to one of the color scheme designers and start to establish a color palette. Okay? We have text, talk to your neighbor, and then posting your work. Okay? You should comment on other people's logos as part of this exercise. Are there any questions? No? All right, I'll turn you loose.